Welcome to the Keys podcast, Trust Matters Lessons in Leadership with me, Ellie Potter. In this series, I'll be speaking to multi-academy trust leaders, sector experts, leadership coaches, and more to hear about their journeys in leadership. You'll gain practical tips and advice and get their insights on some of the biggest topics impacting the education sector right now. In this week's episode, we welcome Stephen Steinhaus, CEO at Solihull Alternative Provision Multi-Academy Trust. In the first part of this two-part episode, I'll be asking Stephen about his experience in founding and becoming the CEO of an alternative provision trust, what some of the circumstances are that lead to pupils joining the trust, and how the trust is working to create a positive future for students who may otherwise fall through the cracks. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to leave us a review or like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to tune in next week for part 2, where Stephen shares how he believes mainstream education and alternative settings can work together better, what to do when a student seems to be on the path to exclusion, and what he would like to see from the new government to help fix a system that he believes is currently not fit for purpose. Well, first of all, thank you so much for coming on, Stephen, today. If you wouldn't mind going to the very start and hear a bit about your background and how you became the CEO of Solihull Academy.
I came to this country originally when I finished my undergraduate degree and quit playing American football. It came down to I had the offer of a Fulbright scholarship, which is an academic postgraduate fully funded. You compete for an individual country. Mm-hmm. I wanted to come to England and study Shakespeare, and it was that or a professional wrestling contract.
What?
And I said, well, the wrestling contract, I can come back. I can be, the scholar or whatever. And went through the Shakespeare Institute in Stratford-upon-Avon as part of University of Birmingham and did my MPhil there. And then moved back in 2000. And have been here ever since. So I've worked across the kind of West Midlands combined authority of I've worked in Warwickshire, Birmingham, Solihull now, Coventry, Worcestershire, in all different variations of mainly up into a certain point mainstream education.
Yeah.
And in my last role before helping to found Solihull Academy and the Solihull AP MET, was also working in an extended learning center, which was an on-site school pupil referral unit provision. And I kind of knew that the free school application had been accepted and that there were rumors that, there's going to be an AP free school in Solihull. And I was like, I'm going to get me some of that, And so the phrase I used, the two phrases I used was I thought, okay, I'm going to take this job. And part of what I'm going to do with this job is get myself ready for that job.
Yeah.
Not for mainstream headship. And I was the guy who was permanently excluding students. That was part of my role. And so I'm going to gird my loins and get ready. And then I'm going to lie in wait like a flabby panther. And when that advert goes out, I'm going to pounce. Mm-hmm. Came out, I missed it. And I'm sitting in my office. And a good friend of mine who I shared an office with there, she says, hey, isn't that job you were talking about that might be coming? And I went, how the hell did I miss that?
You're joking me.
And so put in the application and went through it. And it was to be the principal designate of the free school which would also become a single academy trust. Okay. And it was a joint venture between head teachers of Solihull schools, one of which was a local authority school, one of which was had its own MAT, Arden Multi-Academy Trust. And Martin Murphy, their CEO, has been with this process every step of the way. And still is. He's one of our trustees and one of our members of our trust. And but also the local authority was involved. So this was in the old version of free school where anybody, there didn't have to be the level of local authority involvement that there is now.
Yeah.
If this isn't making any sense, I could do a whole other podcast on the hoop jumping of it. But it was quite unique in that it was the LA working with MATs and academies to say, okay, we are the wealthiest borough in the West Midlands. Per capita income dwarfs anybody else. It also masks significant deprivation in some areas, significant hotspots for criminal exploitation, domestic violence, and things like that. And it also masks that depending on where you are in the borough, you're talking about 6, 8, 10, 12 years difference in life expectancy and all of these things. So what are we good at in this borough? Well, one of the things we're good at is permanently excluding. We were in the top 10% of all local authorities for permanent exclusions. And we need to do something about that. Let's put in a bid for an AP free school. Mm-hmm. So interviewed for it, got it, and it was literally a beat-up Vauxhall Astra, that's mine, a borrowed laptop from Arden Multi-Academy Trust with a hot desk there, a logo written on the back of a beer mat, and a fake website. That was it. Now, there was a project manager who was an ex-head teacher in the area, and she handed over to me. And when I started in April of 17, we didn't have a building. We didn't have anything. And so the building that we got, we had a license and a lease for the whole bit, but only 2/3 of it had been renovated or refurbished. And we started in April of 18 then with 15 staff. Just was counting on the way down here. 15 staff, 31 students. We had staff in place for the September, but this was just for the one term. And 2/3 of that building. And now that whole building's been converted, and we use every inch of it. That's where our main central offices are for the trust. We've got 4 other sites. We've got 3 academies. We've got 2 sites under construction. We've got a pending corporate sponsorship of an AP free school in Warwickshire. Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah, a lot going on.
There's a lot going on. And that pace of expansion has been and continues to be about meeting needs that are not being met.
Yeah. So you spoke about, obviously, in the borough that you were in the top 10% of places that were excluding pupils. What are some of the circumstances that lead to pupils joining the academy? Like, if you could speak to some of the experiences that they've had in mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, we now, and it wasn't predicated by the Send an AP improvement plan, the government documentation, but we now offer across the trust every possible permutation. Well, even we do offer some part-time places as well. Is it a permanent place until you take your exams? Is this assessment and intervention for 2 weeks? Is this, a 6-day provision for a student who's been permanently excluded? Is this a preventative transition place for the entirety of the rest of their compulsory school career in order to avoid PX? And the reasons, some of the same reasons are still the same from when we opened in 2018. Still the number one reason for suspension and permanent exclusion in this country is the catch-all persistent disruption. So, but also, we have students who, given the pressure that the mainstream system is under, their needs cannot be met in a how am I going to have for a student who needs, there's a significant proportion of students who don't need what I'm going to describe, but if a student needs a relational approach and a key worker or a number of key workers and time to regulate, to process, to attach, how am I going to be able to do that? Let's this is a scenario that exists with the schools we work at. Rack concrete means it's in a temporary classroom with 32 other students. How is that member of staff who's teaching that with, if we're lucky, a TA going to meet some of those individual needs and make those reasonable adjustments? The mainstream system And we work with so many mainstream providers, and they're doing an unbelievable job. But the system is not fit for purpose.
Yeah.
And yes, there are some schools that buck against that system. But there's also some schools that are on the sharp end of that system. And in every school, there are young people who are not built to succeed in that system. And that's more importantly, that system is not built for them to succeed. From a funding standpoint, from an infrastructure standpoint, from a staffing standpoint, from a curriculum standpoint. And so more often than not, what the child, it's not a child, young person. Oh, well, they are, but you know what I mean. I still am not sure what I'm supposed to say.
Pupil.
The pupil, when the pupil comes to us, so often what they discuss as their issues with their education, actually, you burn off a number of those and you get to the real crux of what is preventing them from progressing into a life.
Yeah.
Not just a job or a career, but a life, being a world citizen who can look after themselves, and, you know, have a career or a job that helps them live that life. And so, particularly coming out of the pandemic and as we expand, the reasons for why a child is referred to us, young person, is referred to us, become more and more myriad.
Yeah.
And what we have found, and it goes back to what we talk about, and I, you know, bang on about all the time, is alternative provision / pupil referral units, but also alternative provision in its widest sense is curriculum intervention.
Okay, yeah.
It's, can we find a pathway or create a bespoke pathway for what this child is lacking? Whether that be opportunity or unmet need, or, you know, sometimes it's just somebody who can call you on it, you know, a bit of a kick in the backside. Because again, one of the things I always find this fascinating is when you'll see some students who have been referred for one reason, but actually some of the stuff that they got away with in mainstream school, because there's 300 kids on a playground, I can do X, Y, and Z, and nobody's going to call me on it. Whereas APs like ours, we know our students so well.
Yeah.
You can just call them. I know, Jimmy, I know what you're doing.
Yeah, you can't hide.
Yeah, you're not gonna do. You can't hide.
Yeah.
And some of those kids are like, "Oh man, I you know, I can't get away with anything." Yeah. No, you can't, because that's what the real world is like. You know, so there's so many different reasons why students are referred to us, and what that has predicated then is constant review of our curriculum or curriculums, curriculi, curricularum, whatever the plural of curriculum is, because it means that there are multiple curricular offers, even in an individual provision or an individual academy, which is really exciting because, you know, 7 years ago when I was walking around the industrial estate that is the base of our first school and our central trust offices, you know, I had the suit on and the black tie and the black shirt and the overcoat and whatever. I think people thought I was debt collector, but I was going around as part of the consultation to open the school, and so many people say, "Oh, you're opening the unit, you're opening the naughty lads." School, and you're like, oh man,
the negative connotations,
you know. And we do work in local authorities where head teachers will talk about students who are in 6-day provision who have been permanently excluded, and will say, and Ellie, it breaks my heart, but it also infuriates me. Well, that child hasn't done his time yet. Now, they don't mean what they're saying,
but the connotation of that is,
and the you know,
the language around it is very restrictive.
Well, because actually it speaks to the truth, is that if you're PX'd, you have a better chance of being arrested and being involved in criminality and all those. But,
It preempts it.
That's how we still think of AP. The best AP doesn't just respond to it, challenges that notion of surely if you are permanently excluded or in danger of permanent exclusion, somewhere, somehow, things have broken down. And therefore, you need the best shot you can at that point, not whatever's left over.
That's the game-changing point, isn't it? That's when it becomes even more important to get things right and to change the direction of that pupil's life. And I guess one of the things that's difficult is the balance between academic rigour, therapeutic support, pastoral care. How do you manage to do that in your setting with so many different needs and there's only so much time in a day and whilst a pupil's with you?
I mean, there is that baseline of actually safeguarding. It trumps everything.
Yeah.
So, are they safe? Are they alive? Because the data says they got a pretty good chance of not being safe. Just being honest. So that sometimes will trump everything else. But what we try to say is, yes, it's curriculum intervention, but intervention is intervention. So an intervention might be a safe space. An intervention might be therapeutic input, CBT, anger management, bereavement counseling, mentoring, working on gang involvement and how to extricate yourself from that. But that is not, it doesn't take precedence over, it goes right alongside. That is part of the curriculum. Yes, you should be striving for as much progress as possible in English, maths, and science, and the expanding vocational offer that we put in place, and the humanities and sport and peace. Sport's huge in our trust, because these are a lot of the students. It breaks my heart. I've said that the second time. When you'll sit down with a young person who's come and been referred, and you'll say, "So, what do you like to do? You play any sport?" And they'll say, "Oh, well, I used to box. I used to play football." They're 11.
Yeah.
And you're like, "Oh man, come on, let's go.
Don't give up on that." Yeah.
Let's go. So that pastoral intervention, therapeutic intervention, academic intervention, or you could replace intervention with that pastoral and behavior curriculum, social skills curriculum, the careers curriculum, the cultural entitlement curriculum, PSHE, all of that. These kids need that as much, if not more so, than students who are comfortable and competent in the mainstream offer, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. And you've briefly touched on some of the statistics that are quite shocking around students in alternative provision. Can you expand on some of those? Just, I feel like, so our listeners really understand like what the outcomes could be if the intervention isn't there, and what you do in your trust to try and, I guess, not reverse the statistics, because that's really hard to do in like a small place on a national scale, but what are some of the things you put in place to make sure your students aren't part of those statistics nationally?
I think the team that we work with in the individual academies and provisions would say we are trying to reverse that. What a gut-wrenchingly difficult, but really worthwhile thing to say you do. So there are shocking statistics, but then there are statistics we should be angry about.
Yeah.
And the one that we should be angry about as a system, as a society, there's probably, well, actually, there's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, or the list goes on. But the fact that a child who is referred to AP, at best, has a 1 in 2, in this country, has a 1 in 2 chance of being NEET. Now, it's a wonky metric, NEET, but not in education, employment, or training, within 3 months of leaving school.
Wow.
3 months. So that means they don't make it this time now. You're done. You might have started a course or whatever. That's over. 1 in 2 chance.
Wow.
So, when people say, what do you do? What sum up AP? AP is social justice.
Yeah.
But it's also reform, because what happens, I don't have to spell it out. I do spell it out quite often. But what happens if that child is neat? What's the best case scenario? It's not hugely fantastic, is it?
No.
And who pays the cost?
Yeah.
We do, as a society, as a community. So that statistic in and of itself, and pandemic, that rose to something like 67%.
Wow.
Because there were limited scope of opportunity and whatnot. So there is a huge emphasis in our trust on careers, work-related learning, world of work, the real world, and not just as an add-on or a sidecar to the curriculum, but even within the adaptive curriculum and adaptive teaching and learning. There is real power in tying. We had a student who wanted to. I think his dad worked in the kitchen. He was a builder and worked in kitchens or something like that. And he said, "Well, I'd like to, do what my dad does and take her. And so why do I need English?" And I said, I remember this discussion with him. I said, "Is he a sole trader?" And he said, "I don't know what that means." And I said, "Well, is it him? Is he freelance? Does he own the business? This, that, and the other thing?" He said, "Yeah, he works for himself." I said, "So if he's touting for work, who's going to write the advertisement? Who's going to put the quote together? Who's going to communicate all that? You going to pay somebody to do that, or are you going to do that yourself?" And just for a second, I had him. Just for a second. Now, we wiggled off the hook. But just for a second, he was like,
"Oh, wait."
Oh. Yeah. But, sometimes it's just literally, yes, the system says you have to have a 4 in English and you have to have a 4 in maths to do X, Y, and Z. But isn't that a great reason to do it?
Yeah.
It's the ticket. That becomes your ticket. Okay, boom. There we go. Pre-pandemic, less than 10% of AP students nationally got a 4 or higher in maths and English. I think it went down to or it may still be, 4%.
Wow.
4% got English and maths. 1% in this country get 5 4s or higher at GCSE. 1%. And what the hell are we doing?
Yeah.
If that's the best that this system can do,
it's not good enough.
And so, that partnership between mainstream and AP and special and secondary and primary and getting that through line of, it's like, the example I always use is the best schools, when working with their students who are hardest to reach.
Mm-hmm.
If a child is dysregulated at this point, then everybody who's going to work with them throughout the rest of the day should know that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We're not passing the problem on.
No.
It's, this is how we've intervened, and this has helped that child regulate or re-engage or whatnot. So, and if we could have a system that worked like that, rather than, all the stories that you hear of this child spent year 6 sitting outside the head's office because the primary school was not set up. And how could it be to meet the needs of what this child is going through and dealing with? Then they appear, and they've done the right thing by not permanently excluded, but then they appear in year 7 with a school that's 4 times the size.
You can't adapt to that.
But you also have a system where the underfunding of the SEND estate means that a significant number of APs are taking on students with diagnosed or undiagnosed SEND needs and EHCPs to bolster the lack of specialist places. Now, for some students, AP is the perfect place, or a specific AP is the perfect place for them, given the needs and their healthcare plans. But it can't be a plaster. It can't be, wood putty to fill in the hole in the fence kind of deal. So you've got that going on as well. And it speaks to, okay, we are at the sharp end in AP. But actually, the difference now is we are all at the sharp end.
Yeah.
That's what's become abundantly clear. I talk about the fact that we didn't. Now, I'm an immigrant in your fair country, but the fact that the Dominic Cummings thing, when he went to Barnard Castle and said he was testing his eyes out and all that, the fact that the people didn't rise up and march on Westminster means that we all know how all of this works. And if we're not doing something about it, well, shame on us.
Yeah. The system can't change until people demand change.
No.
Yeah.
No. And also, we all know what works. And in the system, we need to be supporting each other. Supporting. It's funny when Ofsted comes to a mainstream school. More often than not, if that mainstream school has placed students in our care, they rightfully so. That Ofsted inspector should be on the horn or on the door going, right, where's Georgia? And let's talk about her progress. Let's talk about what this intervention has done. But actually, wouldn't that be great if we had those conversations of, hey, can you help us out? I need this information, or come and do this training. Wouldn't that be great if we just did that anyway?
Yeah.
Not because of an external lens.
Yeah.
And we're working in Warwickshire at the moment because our Warwickshire project is delayed. Contractors and general election as well, because it is a free school. But Warwickshire County Council and the LA have seen fit to, well, there's a need, let's do it. And I don't know if I've ever, because it's pure. The work we're doing in the north of Warwickshire is not work we're doing. We're working with.
Yeah, working together.
That social model of the only reason I'm here is to try and help. And the only reason our trust is working here is because we've been asked to help and to work together with you. Oh, it's just I feel so clean.
Yeah.
I'm going in there. I'm like, oh, wow, there's no agenda.
Yeah.
There's no politics. There's no funding concerns because the LA has funded. What can we do? And I call it I'm significantly older than you are, so you probably won't have seen this film, particularly in this country. I call it the Bronx Tale approach, but also it's probably the Kingsman approach.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Where he locks the pub door and says, and then puts paid to him. More often than not, I think what it requires is, I've said this before on another podcast, I'll rent the pub out.
Yeah.
Let's go. We're going to lock that door. Yeah. And you can't, there's two things. Everything stays on the table. Mm-hmm. You can't say no.
Yeah.
Nothing is discounted until it has to be discounted. Here is this cohort. I say all the time, it's the cohort of students who are on that EHCP ladder that are the most vulnerable. If they're waiting for an EHCP or waiting for a diagnosis or waiting for a consultation to come back as a yes. And what are we doing in the interim if that child gets permanently excluded?
Yeah.
Because the mainstream system, more often than not, those mainstream schools will take a graduated approach, will do everything they can, but they're not specialists. They're not funded or set up to deal at that level. And actually, in a lot of those cases, nor are we.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do as a system together? No, you can't. No. You can't say no. Sit down.
Yeah, there's no no's.
Sit down. That door's locked. I've swallowed the key. We can't say no.
So let's talk about it.
Because again, in terms of social justice and reform, There's a Jane Davenport, who's a NAHT, National Association of Head Teachers rep, and an Jane Davenport, OBE. And she's going to punch me when she sees this. She's a retired special school head, and she and I used to, good-naturedly, I used to say, AP and our trust work with the most vulnerable students in the area. And she would say, some. So let's think about that. This is a student who should have an EHCP, should have X provision, but is permanently excluded. And you do the Venn diagram, and is on free school meals, and has social care involvement, and is from this or that postcode or whatnot. Okay, sorry, that is the most vulnerable young person in the area. What are we doing with that? And, I am fully aware how ridiculous I look dressing the way that I dress as a CEO. And quite often I do wear a suit, more so now than I used to. But when you look at a job description for a MAT CEO, there is a lot of discussion about what is your system leadership, not just the system of your MAT, but what are you doing to improve the system that your academies are in? How are you adding value to that? And from an AP standpoint, quite often it's how are you creating capacity? And that caustic impact of permanent exclusion. Now, people think that given my maverick tendencies, that I don't believe in permanent exclusion.
Yeah.
And I've been there. I've permanently excluded students. So I can't say yes, no, we would, because I've done it. But there is a way of looking at it as, let's just be honest, is this necessary? If it's absolutely necessary, then yes, I will fight for your right to do that.
In your eyes, what deems necessary?
Probably the damage is irrecoverable, both to the child or young person and those involved.
Yeah.
And, whoever the excluder is. I was having this discussion the other day with a assistant head for behavior, and he said, it takes a piece of me every time I do it. And I went, I know.
You've been there.
And whether that's one or two or three a year, or if we're, it hurts. And if it hurts us, how do you think the kid feels? So there is that element of sort of marginal gains and creative capacity is that if we can extend our reach and influence and input and deployment of expertise and resource to prevent a permanent exclusion. And I don't mean that just by, okay, we're going to put this child into a preventative place, but what else can we do in the system?
Yeah.
If you're talking about a borough, Solihull has probably about 40 odd at the secondary on average. Now that has gone up as the national numbers have risen. But if you're saying 40, if you prevent one, that's not a marginal gain. That's a gain. That's a gain. Because if I'm preventing one, that means some of the resource that child would have been taking can be used for somebody else. And then it's kind of sliding that piece and that piece of work back that, okay, if I've got, and for example, our 6-day provision in Solihull has 20 places with the idea that they will be there a term at most, rotate through, move on to a permanent destination. We can help 20 more. Now, in that, if it's a good year and we're at 38, there's 2 places that can be preventative.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean you have to come to the bricks and mortar. That means all that expertise, all that input, all that therapeutic work can be happening to prevent the PX. And going back to the earlier statement about they haven't done their time, surely the PX is the punishment. You are no longer allowed to attend here is a punishment. That's that's not just a sanction or a consequence. That is a punishment. That is on your record. There's nothing you can do about it. Next day, the work starts. Where are we going from there?
Thank you for listening, and thank you very much to Stephen for joining us today. Next week, we'll continue this discussion and dive deeper into how Stephen believes the system can work together more collaboratively. You won't want to miss it. In the meantime, to find out more about how the Key can support your trust, please visit thekeysupport.com/trust. For more information about Stephen, links to relevant resources and information on how to subscribe to the Trust Matters Monthly newsletter, head to the description below. If you enjoyed this episode, please do like and subscribe or leave us a review.